and welcome to Pale Reflections, a proud member of the Duff Network where we reflect on Wildbow's most sunny work as it releases. I'm Ruben Morehouse.
And I'm Elliot Diebold.
And hey, the fan art contest that we've been talking about for a few weeks is over. So congratulations to the winner, who was
Aquila.
Aquila. I get them mixed up because they both have aqua in their names. But yeah, a beautiful piece of. Well, I don't think it was specifically Gravity Falls inspired, but definitely had that art style vibe to it.
It jumped
featuring
out
all
to
the
me
Ken
immediately as Gravity Falls-esque.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the runner-up was a packed
Oh my
entry.
god, I loved that.
That we can't really go into much detail on this
It's
podcast.
spoilers, but it was a beautiful diorama of a very. What I found so impressive about it was it's notoriously a hard to visualize scene.
Yeah.
So the fact that they chose that to make a diorama out of, and then like nailed it so thoroughly, is very impressive.
Absolutely.
You can find all of the fan art entries and all that stuff at our website, which is duffmedia.com, but they're all great. So congratulations, everyone. And let's dive into Leaving a Mark 4.4, shall we?
Let's do it.
We're now thoroughly in the Hogwarts arc of this story, as that intro music might have suggested. And so we begin with Avery doing some stretching and preparing to head off to the Blue Heron Institute.
Yeah, I felt like this stretching bit, I felt it very strongly. I'm still recovering from what I did to myself a few weeks ago. So definitely took note of how important
it
stretching
spoke
is.
to you very directly. Yeah.
I mean, so there's a lot to talk about here, but I just want to open with the fact that Avery was considering, in order to keep up soccer, finding a path that she could take 6 times a week. That's insane. Like, Avery, I know you like soccer, but like, do what Melissa said. Just take up jogging. Like, fuck me.
Yeah, she thinks about taking up jogging, and then she thinks, I'll probably take up jogging if the school didn't have practical lessons that involved running from a horde of goblins, child snatching fairy, or whatever. Which is great, both because a horde of goblins and child snatching fairy are two of the creatures that live in Kennet, so that's fun. So is this a joke or foreshadowing? I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, she doesn't need to travel to get those experiences if that's
exactly.
really what she's after. Yeah, I mean, we'll probably be talking about this a lot today, but there's some really fun riffing on like Hogwarts and all those sorts of young adult magic schools in these 2 chapters, which is like just always fun. But yeah, just the fact that Avery was that dedicated to soccer that she was trying to take the paths 6 times a week. I was just like,
yeah, that's pretty crazy, right?
Yeah, like the safest one we've seen so far was it was called Zoomtown, right? The one at the start of this arc. And even that one, it was like every time you take it, it gets faster. So 6 times a week, you're going to go through it well before the summer, I imagine.
But she's going to get better and better at it, I'm sure. Yeah, no, it's obviously a crazy idea.
We should also touch on this moment where Avery's like looking at herself in the mirror, and she gives herself like a little golden check mark of glamour for being good. Like again, I'm just this whole glamour thing. I just can't sit easy with it. She's like using it to make herself better, but it just doesn't feel right to me, you know?
Yeah, we don't get much glamour-centric stuff this chapter for Avery, which I'm not sure if is reassuring or worrying that she hasn't like had an epiphany. It's just kind of faded into the background.
Yeah, like I want to be wrong, and she is just like having genuine character growth, but just like underpinning all of that on glamour from like a notoriously shifty character just sort of has me a little bit worried still.
Yes, I agree with that. I mean, we talked about child snatching fairy before. Like, you know, the fact that that's her source. I mean, not exactly. She seems to be more of a Guillermo gal than a Marissa Stan, but considering that, you know, she's getting this from fairy, it's always a bit of a, I don't know, just like a dark shadow waiting to pounce.
Yeah, exactly. She also calls out like her deer antlers is immature because she's looking at herself with the sight, and so she's got like her deer face on.
Yeah.
And like just, you know, in terms of her pointing those out as she's talking about growing and becoming a better version of her.
Mm.
I was just wondering if like the vision of each of the Cannoteers in the site is maybe going to be something we should be tracking to represent where they're at. Like I'm thinking back to Lucy's hair being pink,
Mm.
and that's something that like unless I just missed it, like I don't feel like it's gone anywhere. Like it sort of came up and it was like, oh, that's interesting, and then it snuck back away from our notice. And I just wonder
Mm.
if maybe we should be tracking what each of these three looks like in their sort of spirit world forms, and see how that's mapping to where they're at.
Yeah, interesting. I wonder because yeah, you're right that we've kind of got these like spirit markers for them, for want of a better word, right? Um,
Well, like I view the site as you seeing the world the way the spirits do, which is essentially the true sight, right? Depending on
yeah,
like definitions of stuff, but like so like Avery, like it would make sense to me that if Avery grew more mature, she would have more mature deer antlers.
yeah, I can see that, but again, I would be reluctant to think of this as like, her goal shouldn't be to max out her antlers, right? Because who knows what that means. In the same terms of Verona becoming an other that we're going to touch on next chapter, like this is a marker for how far they are down a path, but that it's not like necessarily the goal to get to the end of that path, you know?
No, I mean in the same way that like very very extreme bodybuilding is often not much healthier than like being a bit of a slob, right? Like you can sort of swing too far. So like obviously I'm not saying
Yeah.
you need to constantly chase those antler gains. Um, as well, like, I'm just thinking, am I making this up, or is it a thing that like deer they grow out their antlers and then the antlers fall off and they have to grow new ones? Have I just made that up,
Mm.
or is that mooses or something?
Look, it might be a
These
thing.
are
I'm not
all
really sure.
these are all like American animals that we don't understand
Yeah, that
down
we don't
here.
have here. No.
Um, I feel like there's something in the antlers grow and then they fall off and they grow new ones like each season. So I don't know. Maybe that's something. She'll grow out antlers and then realize they were shitty ones and grow new ones. I don't know.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. We'll see. But you're right. I kind of just want to express. I don't know if it should be the goal to get to full antlers for Avery. But anyway. So yeah, Sheridan comes into the room as Avery is prepping and gives her a heads up that their dad has been told that she is gay.
Yeah. We're gonna have a lot to talk about there, but
Mm-hmm.
the first thing I just wanted to touch on is like immediately as Sheridan enters, she's just set up as the opposite of Avery. Like Avery has spent the whole chapter till this point like stretching and sort of thinking, and like Sheridan just enters, and the term zombie mode is used. Like she's lazy, she lies in bed and puts on like a shitty TV show. Like she's the complete opposite of Avery right in this instant. I feel like that's important because like that makes it all the more significant to me how good Sheridan is from this point.
Mm, yeah, yeah. Sheridan's great, right? Like this is great. I love it. Sheridan's become one of my favorite characters now. With her, I guess I would call it equal opportunity grumpiness.
Yeah, she sort of perfectly encapsulates like the sort of zero fuck acceptance. Like
Mm,
you could almost see part of her thought process. It's like, why would I give a shit if Avery's gay? Like, how does this affect me?
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
which is like in an ideal world, that's how a lot of people would surely think about this sort of stuff, right? Like, it shouldn't matter in a perfect world.
Yeah, yeah, exactly right. Right, like it's. I mean, yeah. I mean, we don't need to argue this. Obviously, Sheridan's view is the right view here. But just the way that and it kind of reminds me of how she was viewing herself when we get that chapter after every soccer practice a while ago. And
Yeah,
she was talking about how she kind of had seen it as her role as the big sister to kind of be a bit shitty to help prep Avery for the real world. And you see these beats of Sheridan seeing like, well, and she even says, I don't want to pile onto you when I know you've got shit going on, which is like an interesting approach, um, because it kind of suggests that Sheridan just thinks that everybody should have a little bit of shit to deal with. But if Avery's already got her quota filled, then I'm not going to add to it, which is just a weird and interesting mindset, I guess.
yeah, well, yeah. I guess she thinks people sort of need that. I've definitely known people in my life who have that sort of opinion. So I could absolutely see it. I mean, I guess what is so kind of endearing about Sheridan in this segment is she's trying to act like she doesn't care, but she's just consistently being pretty cool, like in the big picture. She's kind of
Mm.
like doing a bit of a snowdrop, and that everything she says in isolation is maybe not the best, but when you sort of realize the context, you're like, oh, Sheridan's been pretty good here. Like the bit where like Avery's like, I want you to treat me the same. Like this shouldn't change how you see me. And then the sort of goodbye Sheridan gives her later is like, hey, don't forget if you break my stuff, you owe me $90. And it's this
Mm.
really like heartwarming moment because Sheridan is still being the same kind of ass to her, which is
Yeah, she's
good now.
intentionally exactly. She's intentionally doing exactly what Avery said of like basically saying to her, "All right, I won't treat you differently if that's what you want."
Yeah,
Basically,
exactly. Like it's such
it's
a
lovely.
nice little goodbye.
Yeah.
And like even all the others, like she brings up stuff like she's like, hey, like Grumble's into a lot of shitty politics, like that might be an issue, which is just like I think she's just saying, hey, I don't know, she's just making sure Avery's sort of aware that there's potential problems, and I feel like basically saying watch out, I'll have
Mm.
your back, maybe. I don't know.
Mm.
It'd be very interesting to see how Sheridan acted if this sort of blew up, you know?
Mm. Yeah. We'll see, I guess. Yeah. If there's and this kind of ties into when Avery is freaking out over Sheridan says that their dad was freaking out at somebody when he told them, and Avery's kind of unsure if that's because he's actually a bigot or if there was something else that she doesn't have the context to.
Yeah, like, for all we know, the guy giving the news was being a bigot and, like,
Yeah,
delivered it in
exactly.
a really gross way, and the dad was yelling at
Yes.
him for, like, yeah, being disgusting about it, you know?
Yeah, totally. Um, so yeah, it's this weird moment of you can kind of feel the rift forming between Avery and her dad. But I do think it'd be interesting to see if the situation does come to a head, what's that going to look like? Because I think Sheridan would go to bat for Avery against either their dad or Grumble. We'll
I
have to see.
I would hope so too, but that would sort of be the moment where you could definitely just 100% be on side because like, Sheridan's good here, but, like, if things got heated and she just, like, excused herself and did an Alpie or something, I'd be a little less inclined to think she was awesome. Whereas if she, like, stands up to bat for Avery, then you'd be like, "Yeah, go Sheridan. Somehow you are best sibling."
I know. Who would have thought when this story first started? But it does seem like that's the way we're going.
Yeah, seemingly.
Yeah. Um, so, yeah, okay. One more bit before we get too positive on Sheridan.
Yeah.
I just want to pull out this quote that really just genuinely floored me for a moment, where Sheridan's talking about about Avery being gay and says something to the effect of like, "I thought that was usually the youngest child, hormones in the womb or whatever, getting mixed up as you have more kids." I was just kind of like, "What? What is that? Is
I
that a thing?"
I
Is
heard
that
that
a
growing up.
rumor that people believe? Really?
Yeah, I have never looked into the scientific veracity of it, and I haven't quoted it for years, so don't. I'm not saying at all this is true, but that was definitely like when I was a young teenager, like Avery's age. That was definitely something I was told is like it was more common
Really?
for people to be queer like as younger siblings.
Interesting. That's crazy.
Again,
Again, no,
absolutely
no, of
no
course,
idea
we're
if
not
that's true.
leading. Yeah, I haven't Googled this at all, but it just was something that was so out of left field to me. I was just like, what the hell is this? Anywho, so during this scene, Carrie gets injured, and Avery uses this distraction to move her dad's attention away from herself so she can ride with Matthew and the others to the Blue Heron Institute.
Yeah, and, like, again, I know this makes sense. Like, she doesn't want her dad driving her there. That opens a whole can of worms. But again, like the imagery of her like shutting down a connection from her dad feels like just remembering where she was when this story started, like someone who was constantly falling under the radar, and then now
Mm.
she's so rich, but it's like her dad is really trying to do something for her, and she's sort of sabotaging it. It I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into this, but it's just like with all that context, I'm sort of like, oh, this seems like a bad sign. And this is the right thing to do here, but this is just a sign that the practice is not always for the best.
Yeah, it does feel like she's kind of running away here, right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, she loves to run. That's why she picked a deer. But failing to address this is just going to have it be building up bigger and bigger, right? Like, at least with Grumble, it feels like she took a kind of active step to help shepherd him in the right direction to where she would be able to feel comfortable talking to him about this. But with her dad, it was just close that door, you know?
Yeah. Well, she
Yeah.
moved her dad over to Grumble, which is like it's kind of good because on the one hand, hopefully we can get Grumble away from whatever
Oh,
Fox
wait.
News is called.
Is that
Um,
right? I thought the way I interpreted that was she did a diagram to stop Grumble paying as much attention to the TV, and she did a diagram to focus her dad onto Carrie. But maybe those two were related, and I
I thought it was just
misinterpreted.
one diagram that was the attention grabber, and she stuck it like in Grumble's coat or something.
She sticks one behind the chair, but she also slips
Right?
one
Yeah.
into, I think, Carrie's back pocket. God.
Well, one of us is
Anywho.
confused. It doesn't. It doesn't really
I mean,
matter.
hopefully one of us is correct. We could both be wrong.
um.
Uh,
Yeah. What I was sort of talking about Grumble. Like Avery sort of thinks on how much it'll hurt her if he's a dickhead about her coming out. And then she sort of thinks on this sort of difference of philosophy she has with Lucy. So Lucy basically wants to fix the world. Like she wants to sort of proactively go out there and get people to stop being ignorant dumbasses or challenge them whenever they are. Whereas Avery is sort of like, as long as the people are, like, as long as I have my close group around me, like it'll be okay. Um,
mm,
it's yeah, I don't know. It's so interesting. Like I really interested to see like as we sort of move forward and as we move into this new environment, how those two sorts of ethosy might work or might interact or just sort of compare them because it's like I don't know. I'm torn between saying oh Avery shouldn't have to, but then also like someone trying and being proactive like Lucy that's often how things get better. So
mm.
it's hard.
Yeah, yeah, it's always that kind of thing of like people should only fight the battles that they feel like they have the capacity to fight, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It's no one's responsibility to take on those battles, but also if nobody does it, obviously that's bad too. So it is an unloosable kind of situation there.
Well, I
Yeah,
suppose
I don't know.
I
Let Lucy handle it, Avery. You focus on your own shit. Lucy's the battler.
yeah, but don't put it all on Lucy either.
True,
Like,
true.
because I wonder how much different ideas like that might come from the fact that like Avery doesn't present as gay, right? Like you wouldn't just walk past her
Right.
on the street, like unless she was wearing like a pride shirt or something. But again, that's a
Hmm.
choice. Whereas like
Hmm.
Lucy is always black. Like
Yeah,
if there's some ignorant asshole, they can just take
that's
one look at
always her
her.
battle to fight. Yeah, of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, would Avery feel different if she gets a girlfriend and every time they walk down the street holding hands or whatever, like,
Mm.
people are coming up and being like dickheads to them?
Yeah, or she, changes her style to something that could be more stereotyped as lesbian attire or whatever by people who are close minded. I can kind of see that.
Yeah, yeah. Like,
Mm.
just sort of thinking, like, because, Lucy has to put, well, I mean, we talked about Lucy puts hours of effort into like every day bulletproofing her look to make those people shut up. That's not something Avery really has to do, right?
Mm. Yeah, yeah. She gets the luxury of not having to do it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Mm. Anyway, Avery pulls off her distraction, and she meets up with Matthew and the gang before they are driven off to summer school.
Can we talk about this quick conversation they have about like Snowdrop's mating instincts?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, like I just have so many questions. Like it's like Lucy says, like the more I was learning, the more I got morbidly curious about this because Snowdrop gives us the impression she still has these mating instincts and she's gonna like have 2 litters a year or some shit. How does that interact with her essentially being sentient now, like on a level that I just don't think an opossum is? Um,
Mm.
like, yeah, I don't know. I have so many questions to the off. Like, I mean, not really a relevant one, but to the offspring, are they kind of othery or magical as well? Or
Yeah,
are they just gonna be regular?
it's crazy to me to think that there's some version of this story where she just like eventually goes back to being an opossum and just like living the rest of her life as a standard opossum. That's crazy, right?
Yeah, or is she just like still gonna be Snowdrop but like pregnant because she's been like following these instincts too? And what does it say? I
Mm.
mean, like something we'll really be getting into later in this episode is how much we're starting to explore these relationships between others and practitioners, like from the other side.
Mm.
And I feel like there's gonna be a lot of talk over the next like arc or two about like what an other is, because the Canadians seem to have pretty different ideas about that from most of the other people at the Blue Heron Institute. And like
Mm.
so this sort of ties into that a little bit. Like, how much someone like Snowdrop is susceptible to these instincts is kind of important, and maybe that's what this whole conversation exists to just sort of start planting those seeds in her head.
Yeah, start planting the seed of how Snowdrop is still more instinctual than you might think.
Yeah,
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it is just like, and it's a weird conversation. It does have a bit of an adorable ending where Avery promises to basically not let Snowdrop die young, which is lovely.
yeah. Well, and definitely required. Um,
Yes.
Uh, there's also this bit like so as you sort of said, Matthew takes them to the Blue Heron Institute, and and he drops them off like as far away from the school as he can, basically.
Mm,
He's super uncomfortable there, and Avery directly compares it to the like seeing homophobic bullshit on the news that Grumble's watching.
yeah.
It's just a nice. Not nice for a certain definition of nice. It's an effective reminder of it's like as they're getting dropped off at the school, like just a reminder that we need to be afraid and that there is this discrepancy or whatever between like the others and the practitioners.
Mm. Yeah. The way that Matthew treats the practitioners in this school, I think really sells, or really sold to me at least, how big this rift is between practitioner and other. Because that seems like it's what this part of the story is setting up, is the idea of the relationships between practitioners and others, and what the
Same.
social norm has become, right? And God, it's grim based on how Matthew acts. Like there is clear fear and hate that is in the way that he is acting. And it really endears me to him, honestly. Like, Matthew is someone who has been quite suspicious at various points throughout this story, but this part of it is just so clearly earnest that you can't help but think, like, what a horrifying life this must be.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And like cuz Matthew is the only candidate other who could have done this because like I don't know what he
Mm,
looks like in the site or anything, but presumably he sort of passes as a practitioner because he kind of was. Like,
yes.
it might take a trained eye to notice that he's not really one anymore because this doom has taken such root inside of him.
Mm,
But like the fact that he's basically like he's not sticking around to find out, right? Like he is someone who used to be a practitioner and has kind of become another, and he's just fucking terrified of these people. Like it really sort of
mm,
sets this tone as we're getting dropped off of, hey, just a reminder, like all the characters we've really known so far are terrified of these people and basically feel persecuted by them.
yes. And I
Um,
think rightfully so, right?
I mean, well,
Like,
yeah, based on what we see, yeah,
it's pretty clear that others are, and it becomes immediately clear at the Blue Heron Institute that others are. I mean, I wouldn't even use the word second class citizens because citizens isn't even there, right? Like,
mm,
yeah, it's interesting, and it's very interesting, especially in the way that it plays with Zed in this chapter.
yeah, yeah. I mean, okay, to quote myself from later in the notes, I can't remember where it is, but like the school in a way to me almost felt like elite or even like segregated. Or like
Mm,
there are no others. There are no other teachers. There are no other students. Like it's a point. One of the Kenneteer's questions at some point. Zed's like, no, there's only humans or like practitioners here.
yeah,
The only others that we've seen in the school so far are the
the
like the
brownies.
brownies, which I mean, they're obviously like a servant class, but they're not like house elves from Harry Potter, right? Like they get
No,
their own in a way. They've got their own sort of power here.
yeah, and it's interesting because I don't think anyone would, whereas the house elves in Harry Potter were a servant class were and in story were kind of this thing that needed to have some kind of social action taken, right? Despite the fact that weirdly J.K. Rowling kind of made that the butt of jokes. The fact that Hermione wanted to help this downtrodden class, I guess that's hilarious to J.K. Rowling, but whatever. Um, Whereas these brownies, I don't think you would make an argument for them. I, the argument that you would make isn't they should have freedom. It's this is just a bad situation all round. If I was going to make an argument about the brownies, anyway.
Yeah, but it doesn't
Um,
feel as lopsided as say something like the house elves in Harry Potter, where it's just like, oh, they like it or something. I
yeah,
didn't.
yeah,
I never finished the
exactly.
series, so I don't fully understand where it went. But
Yeah,
like, wait, with the brownies, it's like they've got their own interests in being in this position.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Um, Yeah, the brownies get power from this situation in their own ways, which I guess kind of equalizes it weirdly. But yeah, well, we'll talk about this more as we get into the
Yeah,
Zed stuff, I suppose. So
yeah.
the next thing that happens is the Kenneteers run into Zed, and Bree's there too, and Zed and Bree kind of start showing them around, giving them the tour. And Zed and Bree's tour basically is the remainder of this chapter, and then a large majority of next chapter as well.
You didn't
So
read
we
out the cool ship name that I wrote in the notes.
Zabri,
Yeah.
is that a cool ship name?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the Kenneteers run into Zabri, who
There we
start giving them the tour. There you go. Um, so yeah, a lot of the next chapter takes place as conversations between Zed and Bree and the trio.
Yes, and Alexander's speech, but we'll get there.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. Like this is the point where you can sort of see why this was an Avery chapter. Like Avery sort of points it out. She's like, she has been the newbie entering a strange environment where everyone already knows what's going on before. This is basically a repeat of her however many months ago where she stopped being homeschooled.
Mm,
So
yeah.
she
It
gives us
is.
like a really interesting insight into I guess she just knows what to look for as she's eyeing groups of people. Like compared to Verona's narration next chapter, there's a lot more focus here on like who's talking to who, how they react to each other, etc., etc.
Yeah, it is good to see it because until I read that you'd written this down, I hadn't really connected it to this is just Avery going to another new school environment, like stepping out of her bubble of homeschool to school and now school to magic school, right?
Yeah.
Which is interesting. And we also get a line here which I quite liked where Avery's thinking about how they're now hanging out with Zed, who was, they threw monsters at each other. Um, and she thinks she wanted to live in a world where enemies could become friends, which is nice, especially because we're talking about practitioners and others a lot who are clearly, if not enemies, at least opposed, right?
Yeah.
So maybe this is saying, hey, it's possible. There is a way out of this.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this is something the story will at least comment on towards the end. Like, I would expect some sort of statement ish thing or proper exploration of the possible relationships between other and practitioner because it feels like it's been
Mm,
such a important part, particularly recently.
mm.
But yeah, you're right. I mean, I just love this sentiment of wanting to live in a world where enemies could become friends because I don't know, I'm kind of the same. Like, I want to hope people can get better and get fixed.
Yeah, exactly. It's not. It's a nice, a nice, a nice sentiment, right?
Yeah.
Nice sentiment to revolve your morality around.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the tour continues, and they meet a bunch of interesting people.
that's that's a word for them. Yeah, I mean, we meet like a bunch of different families slash groups here, and they're all insane. I love. I don't think we actually get the family's name, but the ones who are like they call up powerful urban spirits, and so they're like 10-year-old daughter is just running around acting kind of normal and has this fucking like floating black spirit thing following her around as she does it. Like that's just such a terrifying image. I think
Mm,
Avery says that all of her family have black handprints. Like she sees everyone has red handprints and they have black, which to me ties them to like death or something. It's not good.
mm, yeah. Yeah. The urban spirit practitioners really creep me out. They're
Yeah.
just creepy.
Although, like, I think that the idea that the urban spirit things is something I wanted to talk about because something I sort of noticed, and this doesn't apply to everyone at the school, so maybe I'm jumping to a conclusion I shouldn't be, but it's sort of like basically how they're introduced is people can call up like big spirits of like a place or a concept, and
Yeah.
it's usually ancient things. So it might be like I think the examples are like a river or something. This family specifically does it for modern things. So they're targeting urban stuff, so like sewage and things.
Yeah.
And what that sort of led me to think about was like, this school is one third led by like a technomancer and stuff. And what we sort of learn in Alexander's speech next chapter, if I can jump ahead a bit, is it seems like the Blue Heron Institute is a fairly like novel idea. Like,
Mm,
he talks about founding it, he talks about how it was, like, part of his whole mission to, help network and round out everyone's edges, which is so it's like I got the impression from the way he describes it that it's maybe not like every region has its own equivalent of the Blue Heron Institute, like, this is a bit of an innovative thing he's doing. Um,
mm,
Maybe he's just egomaniacal and thinks it's a more original or what you made out like it's more his idea than it is. That's definitely a possibility with him. But I sort of walked away from his speech thinking like the Blue Heron Institute is a fairly novel idea. And what I sort of noticed is we've got so many families here or groups. It's like, technomancers, people who are doing old things but in new ways. Like it feels like this is a sort of like I don't know, new step, a new evolution in these the way these like it's all the forward thinking practitioners who are involved with the school more.
Yes.
Um, I admit some people like Mrs. Durachet, who she specifically deals with the oldest things. Um, I don't know exactly how they fit into this, so it's not like a perfect idea, but just sort of I can't help but think if we're tying like themes like justice systems and all that we've talked about so much, the idea of these newer networks and people who are forward thinking coming together feels important to that.
Mm. Yeah. Um, yeah. I'll touch on this, or maybe it's worth jumping to this now rather than during Alexander's speech. But you kind of, as you wrote this in the notes, you also made a comparison to Kennett, right?
Yeah,
And I think that's something that jumped out to me when I was listening to Alexander's speech as well. Is this idea that the Blue Heron Institute is radical, both in the ray sunshine meaning of the word, but also in the transformative meaning of the word, right? It is something that is, and this is what I love about a character like Radical Ray Sunshine is he clearly is somebody who has, and Zed as a result, and things like the Hungry Choir website. They're these things that have tried to democratize information, which is something that I think is very interesting about our modern world, and that is something that is so transformative to this world of like power and power hungry people, right?
yeah,
So the Blue Heron Institute is radical and disruptive to that world, and I think that's very interesting, especially because we're setting up the kind of central conflict of this being, hey, are others second class citizens, right? Is that what's going on here, and should that be the case, and what will the Kennetiers do to change that? And then we see that the Blue Heron Institute is this radical thing for practitioners, and obviously Kennett is something that we've talked about being very radical of an idea for others. And it's like, this is the perfect storm of a place that can bridge the gap between practitioners and others because both groups are clearly willing to do something a bit more experimental and weird. And I'm really excited to see the story going in that direction.
yeah. So it was part of what you're saying now. I've started like mapping the Blue Heron Institute in my head to like a tech startup or a tech giant. Like to borrow from the notes further ahead, like they were founded by this new god thing that was popping up that was like taking over
Mm,
server architecture, and it really jumped out to me. Oh, this was like a techno thing.
yeah.
That like so like to your point about how it's sort of they're adapting to this new democratization of information. Like I don't think it's a coincidence that it was like modern technology that led to that leap, because that's sort of what it's done in the real world, right? Like it's
Mm,
technology that has made us able to do things and have things like say Facebook, which on the surface connect us all, but the more you dig into it, like Facebook is just making money for those who are already on top. And
yeah.
and that's
And
what the
oh,
Blue Heron
yeah.
Institute is doing. Like
Yeah.
on its surface, the Blue Heron Institute is like, yeah, everyone comes together and we're all better for it. But it's only the people in the Blue Heron Institute who are better off for it. I mean, look at Charles, look at the Kennett
Well,
others.
sure. I mean, only people who are in some sort of circle, right? It's not necessarily just Ray, Durocher, and Belanger.
Well, you have to be like in the
Yes, you have to be
school's
part of
network,
the
yeah.
approved group, you know?
Yeah. Well, and it's just like, they were already the sort of practitioners. So it's like, like there's maybe stability or whatever that is trickling down to say innocents or non-practitioners, but like really it's consolidating more and more power in the hands of the practitioners.
Mm,
And maybe dividing it a bit more equally through them, but really what it's doing is stopping them from killing each other and growing their own power base. It's like when two companies merge,
mm.
right? Like it does. It often just like increases their power.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's interesting. I think you could counter that by saying that the Kennedy others are kind of doing a similar thing, but I do think it's more interesting just to think about the fact that they've both formed these transformational systems, and the the Kenneteers are kind of the avatars being the bridge between the physical human and spirit worlds, right? And I'm just excited for them to act as that bridge and see what happens.
Yeah, yeah, so am I. I think the comparisons and differences between Kennet and the Blue Heron Institute are going to be really fascinating to explore because you're right, like they are similar, like the idea of basically networking, agreeing not to kill each other, and growing stronger. But I feel like the Blue Heron Institute is a bit different because it's already that like you sort of have to be a practitioner who has something to offer to get in, and then they're all networking to sort of make themselves stronger. Whereas like Kennett was very much it felt more co-op-y, you know? It was like, hey, anyone can come in as long as you follow the rules, which are basically don't kill each other. Um, and we're all gonna work together to protect each other.
Mm,
So it's like one of the big differences for Kennett is it was formed as a potentially partially as a response to something like the Blue Heron Institute, right? Like
mm.
you get the Blue Heron Institute, and these practitioners are grouping together and persecuting the others, and so theirs at least is different because it was formed as a means of
As
self
a
defense.
response. Yeah.
Yeah,
Interesting.
but I know there is just like a different vibe, and I don't know enough about the specific rules of them right now to feel like I can safely map them to any comparison or anything. But it just like it feels like the Kennett one is more of like an egalitarian sort of like trying to create a better world, whereas the Blue Heron Institute is a network building power for itself as much as for everyone else.
Yeah.
I guess the extra twist on that is that somebody involved in the Kennett stuff decided that killing the Carmine Beast was a good idea. So it's not
Yeah,
perfect.
I had that thought as well. I mean, we're jumping a bit ahead, but Alexander's speech talks about how the Blue Heron Institute came about because these people banded together to kill a bigger creature, right?
Yeah.
And take its power. And as that was happening, I couldn't help but think, like, one of the top theories of what happened in Kennet is the Kennet others banded together to kill the Common Beast to share in its power. And so it's like, shit, man, like, is that it?
Yeah, I mean, if these two things end up being quite similar, that would be telling in its own way. I mean, I guess we'll see.
Mm.
To finally move on from this extremely long tangent now. I want to pull out one sort of quote as we sort of round out this tour, where Lucy says to Zed, "Mostly, I just want to know who to trust and potentially befriend." And Zed just sort of says, it trails off for about 30 seconds, which is just
Mm.
like we talked about how Matthew was raising alarm bells for us before. um, this is definitely a moment where it's like, okay, your man on the inside is like, when you ask your man on the inside, who can we trust? And they just pause for 30 seconds, like alarm bells.
Yeah, the fact that it's a long 20 or 30 seconds past, like, wow, that is a long pause.
It's such an awkward silence. Like I love how the word awkward isn't used at all in the text, but it's just like the way it's phrased. You're just like, yeah, okay. Everyone was standing there with blank looks on their faces, weren't they?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Um, so the Kennedys are introduced to Mrs. Durocher and Zed's librarian Animus, who Lucy immediately stands up for.
Yes. To go back to your first point,
Mm-hmm.
Mrs. Durachet has a familiar that's been like eating something for 3 years, and we're not going to ask more about this.
What's weird about that?
Where is Verona when I need her? What? Like, it's been eating something for three. I can't. I just need more Mrs. Durachet in my life because she's fucking fascinating. She has the wildest shit associated with. We barely touched
Mm.
on the bit where she like stares them down when she first meets them, and fucking like her eyes go back into her head, and she like peers past their souls or whatever the fuck. Like it's terrifying. She's the best.
Yeah, she's a real creep. She's a real. I mean, not a creep. Just no. Yeah, a creep. I actually do think I stand by that. I was gonna say. I mean, she hasn't done anything like villainous, but the fact that you have a familiar that's been, eating something like ripping out the throat of something for 3 years is, I think, creepy. I would say that's creepy.
I feel like I've had such a Verona response to everything Durachet because I'm just like, yes, more please.
Mm.
Like, maybe I would feel
Mm.
differently if I was there in real life, but like reading this, I was like, sign me up for private classes with Mrs. Durachet. She sounds like she's into the coolest shit.
Yeah. Yeah, she's creepy.
I especially I love the bit where so basically Alexander comes up to interrupt this conversation, uh, and he's sort of like, "Oh, you three are such a mystery," and Mrs. Durachet is like, "Oh, you haven't figured out where they're from yet," and Alexander's like goes on this whole fucking speech about he's like, "Oh, you know, I probably know 2/3 and you know 1/3, and it's just like a more
Mm,
useful 1/3, but like I know more than you, so you should just say what like you know, but like I know more, all right?" So
yeah.
like it's
Ay,
just,
ay, ay.
it was just so petty the way he's like, okay, you can tell me the answer, but before you do, I really need
I
to
just want you to
establish.
know that I know the answer more than you.
Yeah, I just am missing one vital clue, but overall, I know more than you, and that's important
Yeah.
for me to say. He's just he's just the worst. Uh, yeah, I mean, what I love is like Mrs. Durachet kind of calls him out on that a bunch. Like, there's the bit where he goes to give the speech, and she sort of comments like, "Oh, he loves this part," and I feel like that's another reason why I'm so keen on more Durachet stuff in my life because she seems pretty on the level. Like, she's probably just this weird woman who's into wacky primordial shit or whatever the fuck it was called, and like I can get behind that.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess. I mean, if you can get behind that, that's good. The fact that she deals with big creatures just makes me on edge around her. Like, you know what I mean?
I would
Just,
100%. I would be apprenticing under her. I'd dress the same as her.
that's
Like,
so weird.
I
Weird choice.
no way. She's got the coolest shit associated with her.
No, the coolest choice is obviously Radical Ray Sunshine. Um, But anyway, here's something. Alexander, right? Mr. Belanger, a hard one to figure out. Like, because we kind of, there was a bit there where we thought he was going to be the main antagonist of this story, right? Like, he's set
Yeah,
up as this, yeah, I don't know, as this kind of big antagonist, but now he's just very much acting as though, like, everything that happened is water under the bridge between him and the Kenneteers.
he
It's very hard to get a read on how much he's going to be totally fair and level to them and how much he's going to be spiteful to them. I really just don't know.
Yeah, because we came out of particularly Nicolette's interlude, and then the conversation with him after that, with very
Yeah.
much this impression of him as the absolute worst, terrible, selfish man. But then, like in this chapter, and it's maybe confused a little bit by the fact that we're now totally on Team Nicolette from the Kenneteers' perspective as well. There's nothing Alexander does here, which, like he gives kind of grandiose speeches, and he has like spy equipment all over the school, and like all
Mm.
that, yes, it's like a bit creepy, but there's like he doesn't feel like the conniving, completely evil person in these chapters.
Yeah.
And I'm trying
He's
not to I'm trying not to let
right.
myself fall for it because I feel like he
Exactly,
probably
right?
is.
He seems to be so earnest about wanting to provide a space for people to learn.
Yeah.
Like, despite the fact that he clearly has some machinations going on and clearly is getting some benefits out of this, like at the very least, he seems to be genuine about making that a reality, and that's so weird to reconcile with the version of him we got in Nicolette's interlude, at the very least.
Yeah, like I sort of had him written off as just a complete selfish psychopath before. Now, like I'm having to round him out a little bit more,
Yeah.
which is like good, but it's just like I'm trying to make sure I don't let my guard down too much because I'm still pretty sure he is going to betray them the second he could.
Mm-hmm.
Like I still think he is probably very selfish, but yeah, there's like just enough of him that's like yeah, like he seems genuinely invested in this idea of networking and having friendships with the other teachers.
Mm.
I guess I got to look up the exact definition of friendship to know how much he's abusing that term. Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying not to let my guard down, but like I like I think because I find Ray Sunshine and Mrs. Durachet both like totally fascinating. I really want to
Mm.
spend more time with them, and so I'm like trying to put Alexander in the same bucket of like being a bit more like rounded and like intriguing as a character, and not just like evil villain headmaster man.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. I don't know. He's playing the Dumbledore role a little bit too well.
But yeah, so to get back to something you brought up before as well. So Lucy questions Zed's like keeping of the animus in this way, and oh boy, Zed does not appreciate this this line of questioning. Like, I love how it sort of dies down, and then later on, he just sort of out of nowhere is like, like, she actually is fine with it, and, like, the goblins and war dogs that like, they will kill
Mm,
people if practitioners like us don't stop them. And, like, what I love about that is he's clearly been stewing on this, like, through the whole gap. Like, they've clearly, pricked a nerve. And yeah, I mean, I guess this feels like what we're gonna be exploring in this next chunk of this story, because on a level, like, he's not wrong. I mean, we've seen the goblins. They're awful, and, like, Munch
yeah,
leaves town to go and torment and kill people. Like,
yeah,
he had plans to build their own dog by killing a whole bunch of people.
yep,
But then on the other hand, some of them are thriving in Kennet, right? So, and Kennet seems to have rules on limiting how much. I don't know. Like, I'm so fascinated to see where this goes, because on the one hand, I'm like, there's so much more to someone like John than being a killing machine. But then on the other hand,
yeah,
he is a little bit a killing machine.
yeah.
So yeah, like, how do you reconcile these two aspects to them?
I do think Zed's immediate reaction is justifying, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah,
I think Lucy has planted this seed, and this is something that Zed's going to be going off and thinking about, right?
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
and it's interesting that this kind of feels like it's something that they just haven't considered. Like,
Yeah,
we know that Zed has at least been a practitioner for a while, and when you've been in that world for a while, you've just kind of taken on the societal assumptions that exist in that society, and one of them is others aren't people, right?
yeah.
They're not human for sure, but they're not people. They're not sentient creatures that you should worry about.
They're not entitled to the same rights. Yeah.
Yeah, even Alexander Belanger says something to the effect of, "I find this line of questioning fascinating." Like,
Yeah.
it's a novelty to him that these three are like trying to stand up for the idea of an other having some kind of level of rights. And yeah, I mean, this is what we talked about, the idea of others as second class citizens. I'm very keen on seeing where it goes, because I think this is a pretty good first step for it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's going to be super interesting to see how people respond to these ideas being challenged as well. Because this is very much like, we talked about how Alexander has set up this school and seems to genuinely have a passion for creating the network and sharing knowledge. Let's not forget, like,
Mm,
it is essentially like a big private school. Like, not only is it set up in the sandstone and everything, which at least down here is very like old money sort of establishments, but like, what's something the Kennetiers are on, for want of a better word, a scholarship. There's usually big fees to come here.
yes, true.
So like
They're on an extortion scholarship.
yeah. So like, this place is like, yes, it's a place of learning and networking or whatever, but like, there's a pretty significant buy-in. Like, there's that elitist gate. Like, it's a very elitist place, I
Mm,
feel like, and there's that gate to get in. And our trio, yeah, snuck through on a sort of scholarship, and they're going to be maybe challenging ideas that a lot of these people just wouldn't have considered.
mm, yeah. Yeah, but I'm looking forward to the Kentiers changing that perception, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Cool. Anyway, that's the end of Leaving the Mark 4.4. We dive into Leaving the Mark 4.5, which is from Verona's perspective, and it begins with Alexander Belanger beginning his Dumbledore welcome speech, describing the history of the school and how it came to be.
Yeah, so we've touched on this a little bit, but yeah, obviously, they all got together by killing a god, or godling. I don't know, it was becoming a god, I think is what they said, which is like, that's a whole can of worms I'd love to dig into. How does one become a god?
Mm,
That's the direction Verona should go. I'm sure it's easy. But yeah, fascinating to me that the school originated from like a new type of threat.
mm. Yeah. This is wild stuff, right?
Yeah.
There's this god in the machine, techno other, and these three hunted it down together, kind of meeting each other along the way and formed the school. Right, right. Good origin story. But I read through this again and again, and I was looking for any indication that this techno god had like done anything, other than just exist. And there's literally no indication in Alex's speech that this other had done anything other than just exist, right? Like there's no oh, and it, you know, uh, he doesn't even say that when he saw it in his sight it had like a bad aura or anything.
No, it was
Like
just in a waterfall, right? Like it was just
yeah,
chilling.
and in fact, he goes so far as to say it looked like a child, which yes is not a statement of it being innocent, but it's at least something to to state that, you know, this is a childlike other that got a young god that got too powerful. Even like didn't do anything; they just killed it to take its power. Like that's it. That's the only thing that happened. And when I realized that, I was like, surely that's not, I don't know. Like, there's just nothing. There's no crime there. You know?
At the very least, the fact that okay, we don't know because he doesn't bring it up. So he could have been doing all sorts of horrible things. The fact that
Mm,
he doesn't even feel the need to justify it is what was telling. Like I think if it was really about the fact that it was killing everyone, he would have brought that up and been like, "Yeah, yes, it was, laying waste to blah 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 blah. So we had to stop it." Like he doesn't even feel that that's a relevant point. He just says, yeah, it was big and powerful, so we killed it and took the power. Like that's where the priorities were, basically.
yeah, yeah. The fact that he doesn't feel like he needs to say, "Oh, and it was going to kill people." Like, even if it
Yeah,
was, he doesn't even need to justify that, and that's another indicator of just how, I guess, prejudiced this society has become.
yeah. Like it could have been. We don't know because he doesn't even feel the need to specify. Um, I think the one thing we do get told it was doing was running the serve. It had like taken over the company, and so it was like I feel like it was becoming some sort of CEO god.
Mm.
So like it may have more been a matter of competition than anything else. Like yeah, we don't know, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I guess we don't know for sure that it wasn't, like, it could have been malicious. We don't know, but it just is so. When I realized that there was no effort in there to justify, yeah, this thing existed, so we killed it for its power. Like that's not even a statement that needs justification in Alexander's mind.
Yeah, exactly. And then yeah, we've already sort of touched on a lot of this stuff, but the way this school has built itself up as something that is like a network, but with the buy-in that most people have to do, like it definitely feels like a network that is just widening the gap and pushing these powerful practitioners further away from everyone else. I'm really fascinated to learn more about Jessica and how she got involved because like she's the closest we've got to the Kenneteers as someone else who how did she get involved with the school, right? Because didn't she sort of teach herself the practice to find her cousin or whatever? She's the one who was going into the ruins, right?
Yeah.
Um so she's very much someone who somehow got into this network without having to donate books or whatever. Or maybe she did. Like we don't know, but
Mm,
like she's someone I'm fascinated to learn a bit about as we're talking about how like insular this network can kind of be.
mm, yeah.
Also, like I wonder if Charles was maybe targeted because he didn't want to be a part of the Blue Heron Institute. That might be nothing because the Alexander that we've seen in other chapters is very much someone who would just do it for the power. I mean, we just talked about that.
Yes.
Or, but like we don't. I'm trying to remember how specifically we know what Charles and Alexander's argument was about. Like, I wonder how much I wonder if the Blue Heron Institute was a factor.
I mean, it was about prison reform or something, wasn't it?
I think so. So
But
maybe not.
it's weird to think of Alexander Belanger was the person who totally fucked over Charles, and also is this person that we're seeing deliver this speech.
Yeah.
Like, it's definitely a little bit incongruous.
Yeah, which is why, like again, I'm trying to think of him as less completely evil psychopath, but I'm trying to remember that like
Yeah,
95% evil psychopath, right?
yeah, he's definitely got something dodgy going on at the very least.
Just as we finished talking about his speech as well, I wanted to go out this one bit where he sort of is going through all the new students and introducing them to everyone, and he introduces the Kenneteers, and he's like, "Oh, we have a group of wild practitioners," which of course is something he's known about for so long now. Um, and I wanted to call out the response from each Kenneteer because I thought they were just delightfully in character. So after he introduces them, Verona notes Avery stood a little taller, while Lucy turned her head to search the crowd out of one corner of her eye. Verona did the one better and turned to face the crowd with a slight smile on her face. It's just like I just love how immediately I bought all three of those reactions. Like Avery's trying to be proud of herself, Lucy's suspicious, and Verona's just smug.
Mm.
It was great.
Yeah, very in character. um, so Alexander finishes off his welcome speech, and he finally gets to the stuff that we all actually want to know about, which is the nitty gritty details of the administration behind how this school all works.
I mean, that sounds like a joke, but you're not wrong. Like, that's what I always love about the Wildbow stories is how much you can be like, oh, there was this superhero story, yeah, but I'm really excited for the family dinner. And it's like that's a testament to the stories, is that you like I'm genuinely interested in learning about the admin of this school.
Mm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
but
Me
yeah,
too.
I mean, overall, this place is it's such a fun riff on like things like Hogwarts and those other young adult like sort of magical stories. Like to specifically hone in on sort of Harry Potter, there's always this like, haha, this is so charming and great aspect to it, even though like these things are horrifying, like things like the Forbidden Forest or the fact that the stairs can just leave you stranded in the school
Mm.
is always just played off as like, oh, this is so zany. And what I love is like Wildbow's does a really fun sort of like, no, this is just genuinely terrifying version of that. Like, there's all these moments where people are saying things where it's like, oh, make sure you let us know if you're leaving the school, so we don't have to send something out after you. It's like, what the fuck? Like, what monster are they going to send to track down a student who's just gone on a Macca's run, you know?
Yeah, there's all kinds of wild stuff that, like, if you unfocus your eyes, there's nothing going wrong. But if you pay attention to each sentence, there's
Yeah.
so much horrifying stuff happening at this school.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's like, we already touched on like the brownies, like, in
Oh god, I love the brownies. The fact that the staff of the school is this like weird, mystically powerful staff that help manage the school, cook food, arrange furniture, and just if you acknowledge them in any way, you'll be subject to horrifying tortures. Like that's the status quo here. It's so
yeah.
like it's such a perfect metaphor for like if you act in exactly the right way, you don't have anything to worry about. But if you put one foot out of line, you better watch out. Which is the
Yeah.
exact vibe of this school.
Well, and exactly, and like to go off the house elves in Harry Potter again, it was like, that was just treated as you said, like a bit of a joke, that it was like, oh, haha, look at Hermione wanting to save the slave class. Whereas in this school, it's like, yeah, like this is really fucking dangerous, and like everything that's even remotely comparable to something in Hogwarts is like, hey, yeah, but what if we actually treated that as genuinely scary as it is?
Mm.
It's just such a fun response to something like Hogwarts, which treated all of these terrifying OHS violations as zany.
Mm, yeah, yeah, exactly. That I think that is why it's so fun. It is this deconstruction of the Hogwarts trope set, right?
Yeah, yeah. Like right back
I,
to I think we called this out in the thing, but when they got the class list a
mm.
couple of extra materials ago, and there was the like send us your math and English marks so we know how much we've got to teach you of those, because I think that's like a common thing in the Harry Potter fandom, is like the fact that in the Harry Potter Hogwarts like they don't do maths. So presumably all these grown ass wizards are walking around with like year 6 level maths.
Yeah. Yeah, but see, here's the thing about it is it's a kind of deconstruction, I guess, to use that word of those Hogwarts style tropes, but it is also at the same time the exact kind of escapist fantasy that those things still are, right? Like we're in
Yeah.
Verona's head, and that really sells that despite the fact that this has so many terrifying things, it is still like fuck, I would go to the Blue Heron Institute if I could.
yeah.
Like even with
Yeah.
all the brownies and weird like scary teachers and shit, of course I would, because it would be awesome to learn about fucking crazy magic. Like it's
Oh
so
yeah.
great that it can be both horrifying and desperately exciting at the same time.
The 2 weeks I managed to survive at the Blue Heron Institute would be a very fun 2 weeks. Um,
Until you turn into, a part of a rabbit and someone's dad.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
No, I agree. Like this absolutely had to be a Verona chapter because it's exactly the headset we need to be in for like just appreciating how fucking lovely this all is. Like, you can tell Lucy
Yeah.
is spending most of this being, like, critical and a bit paranoid or something, like, like, checking the corners, whereas Verona is just in love.
Mm.
And that was exactly where I was. Yeah, it's very fun. You're right.
Yeah.
I would absolutely go here and meet a terrible demise if I could.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, Zed and Bree continue the tour, give more introductions as they show them to their new room.
Yeah. And so, something we actually haven't touched on till now is so there's basically a trio running the school. I think this is the point where Zed compares Alexander to a principal and the other two to the sort of vice principals.
Mm.
Um and I guess like we touched on this, but like I find all three of them so fascinating. Like Alexander's on top. We know he's an ogre and he's a piece of shit. But like we start to get these more details on like how Mr. Sunshine is like the approachable one. But there's like rules about how you interact with him. Like I could see Lucy butting heads with him because she like rightly usually gets very emotional, and he seems to bounce off of that. And then like Mrs. Durachet, I've already talked about how she's fucking terrifying, but I'm so fascinated to see so much more of her. Um, like just overall, I'm so keen to see interactions with all three of these heads of school, because what I love about them is they're not just like interesting in terms of their practice, but I'm becoming more and more interested in them as characters and how they'll interact with the Kenneteers. Um,
Mm.
like it's going to be so fun to sort of see how these three mentor our heroes.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm very excited to see these characters who are all so unique and strange and see how they're going to play into this bizarre, web of connections that we've set up in this story.
Yeah, because I don't disclaimer. I don't think this is how it's going to be. But like, obviously, we have a trio of Kenneteers and we have a trio of principal vice principals. If you had to map them one to one, like
Mm.
if each one was going to sort of become an apprentice for one of them, which again, I feel like would be a bit simplistic. So I don't think it's realistic, but it might
Yeah,
still be
I don't
fun.
think that quite tracks.
But if you had to, gun to your
Okay.
head or other to your head,
Well, I'd put Verona with Durachet, I think, which then would leave, I guess, Avery and Belanger and Lucy and Ray. I don't know. None of it feels like it tracks that well, to be honest.
I could see Verona and Durachet just because Durachet is dealing with non-human shit, and that seems like exactly
Yes.
Verona stuff.
Yeah.
I would put Avery with Rad Ray Sunshine. I feel
Oh,
like
yeah.
they've both got positive vibes. Like Avery's all about. I feel like there's a bit of a link between technomancy and pathfinding because they're both sort of pushing the edges in various
Mm.
ways. They're not like safe sitting back things. They're both like
Mm.
new up or exploring new stuff. And then Lucy with Alexander because he's all about like the conflict and stuff, and Lucy's obviously like had associations with violent imagery a lot in the story,
Mm.
like her knives in her sight and stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah,
true. I mean, I don't know if that super tracks with Alex, but it's okay.
yeah. As I said, I don't know. I don't know why I wasted everyone's time with that. I thought it might be funner than it was.
This whole show is diving too deep into these questions. Whatever. Um, uh, there's okay. Okay, here's something. Here's another thing to dive too deep into and waste everyone's time with. This teaser at this horrifying Alcazar thing that happened. So okay, so an Alcazar is like a way to turn a creature or an object into like a space, seemingly used as a kind of diagnostic or identification tool. Right? Cool. Great piece of world building. Love it. And so, as part of that, everyone made Alcazars in class, and this girl made an Alcazar and freaked out and then turned into it, kind of lost herself into it, seemingly kind of like becoming lost in this Alcazar, and then becoming parts of it, as in her soul being broken up and put into like the rabbit that was there or the guy's dad that was there. Like, shit, that's probably the most horrifying thing we've heard of in this entire story. And it's just kind of casually dropped in. Like, and it's perfect because this school is such a perfect metaphor for this school because it's got like the craziest practice stuff that's also the most horrifying. Like, of course, that's what you would find at this school as like an assignment. You just make one of these horrifying things.
And again, I think it's like a fun riff on something like Hogwarts, where it was always like, oh no, like somebody got turned into a floaty
Yeah.
thing or a
Turn
rabbit
into a
in
cat,
class.
or like we
Like,
practice the unforgivable curses on each other and shit
yeah.
like that.
Oh no, better send them to sick bay. Whereas in this, it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, she brought like a slightly wrong item in, and was fucking ruined by it. Um,
Yeah.
like this is insane. I got to admit, like I think we've ragged a lot on like Avery wanting to be a finder, but the more we learn
Mm.
about other practices, the more I'm like, oh, okay, it's not actually that much worse. Like there's a
Yeah,
link to be
it's all
made.
terrible. Right.
Yeah, like there's a link to be made between Alcazaring and path or finding, right? Like obviously not the same, but the idea of this Alcazar stuff is you're transporting yourself to abstract spaces. It's not totally dissimilar to the paths. And this is something that a bunch of other people are doing. So I guess finders aren't as out there as I thought.
Mm. Well, no, they are. It's just everything else is more out there than you thought.
Yeah, okay, fair, fair. The
um,
bar hasn't been raised. Everyone's lowered it.
Everyone's bar's been lowered. Yeah, totally. Yep. So, another thing that I really like that we see is there's this beat of we see Chase again, and he's continuing to be a huge dickweed, but everyone knows he's a huge dickweed, and so it's really funny to me because when we first met Chase in Nicolette's interlude, it was like, oh, this is Chase, and he's kind of what everyone is kind of like. That's the impression that we got, right? Like everyone's a piece of shit in
Yeah.
Nicolette's life. And so, of course, this is a horrifying, like the Blue Heron Institute is horrifying because of that. But actually, it's great that that's being kind of backtracked a bit. Chase is just a piece of shit, and everyone calls him out on it all the time. It really like normalizes the fact that yes, there are shitty people and untrustworthy people here, but there's also people who will call them out, and that kind of takes it a step back from everyone at the Blue Heron Institute is shitty too. There are some allies here at least.
Yeah, like I think like again, I feel like the Nicolette interlude was a different vibe because that was very much just Alexander's crew. It was sort of
Mm,
like the boarding school, like all the day students like Zed have gone, and this is
mm,
just the people under Alexander's sway. So like there's a different vibe there because apart from Nicolette, or even a little bit Nicolette, everyone there was the worst. Um,
mm.
but yeah, like so you're right. It is like I think it's different, but it is comforting to know that like Chase is not the norm. Like, and that we at least have this little crew who are just like "Oh, fucking Chase. Like after talking about how we're a bit confused because Alexander doesn't seem like the worst, at least we've still got Chase that we can fall back on. Like, yeah, this guy's a cunt. There's
Yeah,
nothing good
Chase is
about
horrible.
Chase.
Yep.
Um, yeah. It's almost like there's this little social group at the school of like not scary and not assholes. And it consists of
Mm,
Nicolette, Zed, and Bree, and maybe Jessica. And the Kenneteers have just joined Club Normal Person. Yeah. I mean, I suppose that's an important thing. Like we talked about how the Blue Heron Institute is raising up the people in it. Part of that though is that so there is this thing where you can't hurt each other a bit more, and that is making it a
mm,
bit less cutthroat in some ways. Like would friendships like we see with Nicolette and Zed, and hopefully the Kenneteers and those two. I mean, those weren't possible before they were in the Blue Heron Institute, right? So it's not just it is just lifting up the people in it, but like I think importantly, it's helping the good people in it lift up further than they might in a more cutthroat scenario. Like maybe it's not
mm.
all terrible, the Blue Heron Institute, right? Like if it can put the good people in connection with each other as well as the selfish cutthroat people like Alexander and Chase.
Yeah. Yeah. True. Maybe that is some of the good that it's doing. Interesting. Oh, another beat that I really like that we get here is Zed gives a bit more information on how their name change worked, which is so fun. We kind of dived into this topic with Dawn and Kippos like a week and a half ago in our reflecting on Arc 3 episode,
Yeah.
and I'm so glad that Wildbow decided to like explore this a bit more because it was such a interesting interaction of the kind of archaic systems that seem to govern the world with the modern world and modern kind of things that happen in the real world. I'm just glad that Wildbow decided to dive into it a little bit more. I think it's really fascinating.
Yeah, and because it comes after Zed talking about the rules of discourse, which is basically like
Mm,
you can call someone a dick and they don't literally have to be a dick. Like the spirits
yeah.
kind of follow rules of convention or what everyone's doing. So,
Mm,
like the idea that Zed sort of explains here is what he had to do is like change it all in the real world and get everyone doing it, and then it becomes like seen as normal, and then the spirits are kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, you're Zed, that's cool.
Mm.
And what I love about this in particular is because basically what that tells us is the spirits will go along with it as long as people do. So the only thing
Yes.
holding us back is Chase.
It's Chase and people like Chase. Yeah.
Yeah, people like Chase too, but specifically
Oh, yeah,
Chase.
yeah.
Um,
Yep.
like the spirits will follow everyone else's lead, and so as like as long as Chase is doing his dumb bullshit of calling him Z or whatever the fuck he does, like
Yeah.
that's all that's stopping this stuff from being a lot easier. And I think that kind of holds true in real life as well. And so as is often the case in the other verse, it's like the line between the metaphor and real life is a bit thin. So like I really like this interpretation, and like it's sort of what Kipos was talking about in that episode that we had her on.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Cool stuff. Very cool stuff. And that's what we hear at Magic School, right? Is to explore the nitty gritty details of how this world works.
Yes.
So the trio are led to their room, and twist, it was Nicolette's room that Snowdrop burned. But putting that aside, they request their furniture.
Yeah, I mean that's just a very like Nicolette's like Alexander does have a sense of humor, and I got a laugh out of this. This is a funny movie. Alexander's the worst, but I can't hate this. It's hilarious, especially because they brought Snowdrop, which I love Nicolette's response to the fact that they brought Snowdrop. Um, the way they request the furniture and stuff though is very cool. Like this is a cool magic school thing. Furniture on demand.
Mm.
I mean, it's got a cost. If you react to the cool furniture you get, something terrible TM happens to you. But like the idea that you could just draw a new layout for your room and get it instantly, like, is pretty enticing.
Yeah, it's great. It's possibly the best thing about the Blue Heron Institute is you can literally just request a bit of interior design whenever you want, and it'll just happen. Like,
And the
what a
food
dream!
too. I'd get
Yeah.
so I don't want to compare myself to Chase, but I'd probably get fat too if I could just order whatever the fuck I wanted at any time. Like,
It really is just like you're a sim, and but you can also control the sims. So you get to just have whatever furniture and food you want. You can be like, all right, I think I'm going to practice this skill or that skill, and it's just great.
yeah, there's a lot to draw you into this place and make you ignore the myriad of dangers. As I think both of us and Verona are falling for a little bit.
Yeah, it's a nice room. They get some nice furniture. It's great. There's this quote where, okay, here's a good quote. Lucy asks, "Why does this feel ominous?" Which, I mean, Lucy, it all is ominous. What are you talking about?
Yeah, that's basically that could be the catch or the tagline for this chapter.
Mm.
It's just, why does this feel ominous.txt? Just put that between every paragraph.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and moments of things like, okay, this quote from Zed that I really liked, where Zed says, "I can introduce you to others around." Then others as in others, or others as in students. Zed corrected. Just another great beat of of humans and others and the rift between them, right? The rift between practitioner and other. I'm definitely going to be continued to be excited to dive into that.
Yeah, but this is the line where the word segregated first appeared in the notes. Like, I know I've already used it, but this is
Mm.
what put that word in my mind because it was just very much like, yeah, Zed has to correct. There are no others on campus apart from like the brownies and Nina or whatever other, and floating spirits that track 10-year-old girls that aren't at all terrifying.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, oh, and the painting. Okay, so Verona requests a painting for their room, right? And she says a painting that has a cat, dog, and a cat, fox, and deer in it, right?
Yep,
And so,
good idea. Like, it's a nice little. I was
yeah,
like,
a
oh,
nice
that's
touch.
neat.
And she comes back, and the painting is a bunch of like dogs, like foxhounds or just hunting dogs, hunting down a fox and a deer, and there's a presumably dead cat in the mouths of one of the dogs as well, which is crazy. And she gets a nicer one later, which is good. And Avery and Lucy don't see this one, which is nice for them. But thinking about this, I was trying to think, like, is this foreshadowing? Like, because the only, in air quotes, dogs that we know are like John or Yolda, right? So I don't know what this would be saying if it's foreshadowing, but it's grim, whatever it is.
I mean, so the other thing, like the fact that the cat, which is Verona, is the one that like is already in the dog's mouth. That was sort of what I focused on, like rather than literally sort of looking at the dogs as imagery. I was like, is it the school or the brownies themselves? Like something already has Verona in its grip and is coming for the other two as well. Like maybe it's not actually a dog. Like maybe it's even more metaphorical than something like John or Yolda. But like Verona's
Mm,
diving pretty hard into this school, or she's the one in the room uh, with the brownies at the time. Or I don't know if they're
yeah.
in the room. It's confusing where the brownies exist in space time. I think by design.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, this is a good lesson to learn in this case, though. Like, this is a pretty harmless way to sort of learn about like the to be careful of like monkeys' poor wishes. Like, if you just
Hmm.
ask for a painting with those three animals, you're going to get a violent, horrifying one. You need to actually specify, hey, can you give us a pleasant painting, including these things? Like,
Yes, and that might explain. Sorry, not explain that, but that might be a rule that applies also to other requests that you make of the brownies. So probably a
yeah,
good one to keep in mind, right?
not just the brownies, but like I feel like that's a
Well,
good
yeah,
practitioner
true.
thing to have in general. Like that's
Yeah.
it's a good reminder. This is a relatively safe way to have part of that lesson imprinted on you.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. So the group head off to eat, with Zed kind of continuing to fill them in as they go.
Yeah, and I want to call out the bit. So they stop by the library to check in on Nina, and Verona basically wants to go get a bunch of books to read at dinner, and Lucy and Avery basically have to drag her out. And it's a really fun moment. Like they're all trading barbs, and we've sort of skipped over them so far, but something these two chapters did a particularly good job of, I think, is sprinkling in moments of friendship. Like there was the other bit where when they first get to their room, Avery is blocking Verona's way into the room, and so Verona sort of tries to move her, and then Avery starts giggling, and Verona realizes like she's doing it on purpose.
Hmm.
And it's just like a nice little friendship moment of like Avery just shit stirring Verona a bit.
Yeah.
And there's even other ones like Nicolette and Zed have a few moments. Like there's the bit where they make fun of each other. Or Nicolette makes fun of Zed's little mustache, and Zed sort of makes fun of Nicolette's horrible life. Like I don't know. It just really jumped out to me in these two chapters how like as all this horrifying stuff was going on, we did take some times to reinforce that there are genuine connections between groups of people here.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, it's nice, right? And it's nice that the Kenneteers are seemingly becoming a part of that group as well, which
Yeah,
I
like
just like.
if by the end of the summer they're sort of trading barbs with Nicolette and Zed in the same way, like that would be so nice.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Okay, so here's another fun beat that is set up here, which is Zed goes to a lot of effort to warn the group, and Nicolette as well, goes to a lot of effort to warn the group that, in general, they basically shouldn't trust anybody here at this school, um, which is worrying. And I kind of was going to mark it as a point against practitioners in general, but I, that also was advice that they got from Miss when they first awoke from all the Kennet others, right? So I'm kind of
Good point.
like, yeah, you're right. I guess this isn't that big of a deal because this is also true about all the others. Like it's just a world where you have to be guarded and you can't really trust anybody, and you shouldn't, right?
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
again, these comparisons and contrasts between others and practitioners is just stuff I'm so keen to continue exploring.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
There's actually a great quote, like Zed sort of as he's talking about whether they can trust people, he has this one line where he says, "Some you can trust, some you can call friends, rarely both."
Mm.
I just love that as a quote because like I can call someone a friend, but I can't trust them. What does that mean? I can say I trust someone, but I don't call them a friend. Like, what does that mean? Does that mean I can trust them to do the wrong thing? So they're
Yeah.
predictable.
What does that
Like,
mean? I was kind of stumped by that one for a bit as well.
like I think it's just a fun way of just really selling. Like, don't let your guard down here. Everyone's gonna let you down.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. So the trio head back to their room after dinner. We get a bit of time jump to later. And Verona's just really having a good time, right?
Yeah. I mean, I would be too. Again, as long as I'm not in the process of dying, I think I'd be loving this school. And again, another great little fun friendship moment as Verona stinks up the bed with garlic breath.
Yes. Yeah. I, I, it's interesting. I had a bit of a mixed reaction to the way Verona is acting here, right? Which is that she's so eager, and I'm like, you get caught up in her infectious excitement, but it is also kind of worrying, especially when we get to the books that she's chosen from the library. But we'll get to that in a second. But I do also see that like this being finally able to get into this world and get away from her dad is also like hopefully the thing that she needs to realize like, okay, I'm just in a world that is where I have been meaning to be, you know, like regardless of whether she is more or less able to do her turn into another plan, like she's just surrounded by exactly, she kind of feels like she's exactly where she needs to be with who she needs to be in order to avoid uh, turning into an other, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, like Verona turning into an other, I think is going to be a thread that weaves into and out of the role of others that we're going to be exploring in this school, right? Like
Mm,
we just spent so much time talking about, oh, this art, this part of the story seems to be focusing on the relationship between others and people, and then we have like others and practitioners, and here we have a practitioner trying to turn other. Like, there's no way
mm,
those two threads won't bounce off each other. So you're right. It is going to be really interesting to explore it. The biggest asset, to your point, is that she's not with her dad anymore, which will hopefully help. Um,
yeah.
but there's little moments like when she goes to brush her teeth. Which, side note, so she hadn't brushed her teeth, which is like at first you wouldn't think anything of it because slumber party or whatever, at school. But her dad's not making her brush her teeth. Wait, how often's Verona brushing her teeth?
I know. What a weird moment. But you're right. Reflecting on it, I mean, it makes sense. Her dad is not one that would instill good habits in her, right? Like, who does
Yeah.
she have for a role model there?
Yeah, exactly. I'm just I don't know where I'm taking this idea, but it just jumped out to me that like I'm not confident that Verona brushes her teeth at home, and that sort of says a bit. Um,
Mm.
Now that she's actually living with her one parent, aka Lucy, she might do a bit better.
No, her parents are Zed, Brie, and Nicolette, I guess.
I mean, huge step up.
It is a
Um,
step up.
Yeah, yeah. So there's this bit where she finds like a girl crying as she goes to brush her teeth, and to me that like sent, or I felt like it was meant to send signals that we should be a little bit concerned about this place. Like just another little
Yeah.
reminder, it's not all roses. Um, I definitely saw that at school, like when kids would first start boarding. There's like a homesickness that happens. So I don't know, like it makes sense to me that would be happening to a 10-year-old because like that's very young to just be sent away for a couple of months to this creepy place.
Mm, mm, yeah. Of course, it wouldn't be a Verona chapter without her dad rearing his head, I suppose. But luckily, because of the distance, he's just relegated to text message this time. But somehow that makes it even more ominous. Like something even worse has happened.
I love how he's like, I might need you to come home. Like just that it was amazing how it's so perfectly written that one text just made me so angry. Like, what does
Mm,
he need her to come back for? Like, that's such bullshit. Like, he does need her like emotionally because he relies on her as an emotional outlet, which is the problem. Yeah, I mean, there's no way. So Verona basically sends him like a connection blocker to make this go away, and it's been such a recurring thing in this story that like you're basically taking out attention debt when you do
yeah,
that.
yeah.
And like I'm pretty convinced at this point that Verona's just going to start taking out a bigger and bigger, like this is her student loans for the Blue Heron Institute. She
Yeah, they don't have to pay tuition, but they do have to pay tuition in terms of texting connection blockers to their parents.
Yeah, or just Verona in particular, like because her dad's so dependent on her, he's going to fight it the most, and
Yeah.
I have a feeling she's going to keep pushing it, especially while she's loving it here. And it seems quite likely to me that this will continue to grow as we're here, and like halfway through the summer, her dad's just going to show up and shit's going to hit the fan. Um, yeah,
Yeah. We'll see. We'll see. I suspect this text is indicating that shit has hit the fan with Verona's dad. Like,
Yeah,
I
but
don't
she's
know.
going to keep putting it off, and like everything we've learnt
Oh yeah,
throughout the
it's going to get
story,
worse and worse.
yeah, is that like, yeah, you're just building it up and pushing it further and further back and making it worse as you do so. I morbidly curious to see what it's like when it blows up.
Yeah.
It's gonna be fun to read and also awful.
Yep. Can't wait. That's the end of our discussion of 4.5. Let's get into the extra material, which is bedtime reading. Verona gets some textbooks that we saw last chapter, and this chapter we just get to read them.
Yeah, I think we've mentioned this, but like such a testament to this world that I was like, fuck yeah,
Hell
textbooks.
yeah, textbook time. Yeah, definitely.
Wish I could have gone
Um,
into like real university with this level of enthusiasm for the textbooks.
well, interestingly, something that is fairly consistent with the books in the other verse is that they're all written with like very personal stories woven into them in a very
Yeah.
interesting way. It's never just like a flat textbook that is dispersing knowledge. It's you know what it reminds me of is the way that when you look up a recipe online, it always starts with some paragraphs about like, oh, this is my grandmother's favorite Doritos style nachos or whatever, right? Like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's the personal story and backstory that leads to the understanding of this knowledge, which I think is great for us as readers, but it's also a really interesting way of delivering this information because like humans have this thing where we love stories, right? Like if a piece of knowledge, a fact is delivered to us with a story surrounding it, we're just going to remember it more. And I think that's a really interesting way to deliver knowledge in universe as well as to us as the readers.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I wonder if it gets annoying though, because like that bugs me to no end with the online recipes thing. Like I
Yes,
understand
true.
it's for search engine optimization or something. But like I'm so sick of wanting a recipe and I have to scroll through your fucking life story for 5 minutes to get to the recipe. I wonder if
Yeah.
that's how experienced practitioners feel about these textbooks. Like it's like, oh, I have to skip to chapter
Filter all this
4
out. Yeah.
to stop learning about your grandma being imprisoned by a gnarling. Like, ugh. Um,
Get to tell us how long it's going to take in the oven.
I do agree that like it's very fun. Like if this was just written as a textbook with like lists and stuff, it would be a little more dry. But like for this first book, it opens with this bloody grim fairy tale that we already talked about this woman being enslaved by a fairy esque like gnarling, and
Yeah.
I mean it's basically the plot to Stardust. Is
Mm.
this story? It's different, but like it's very similar to Stardust. Yeah, like it makes it so much more fun to engage with as a reader.
Mm. Yeah, definitely.
Such a fun
Yeah.
story. It's like a mini interlude.
Mm. So yeah, we dive into this first book here, which is a book on enchantment and crafting.
Yeah. And so I want to make sure I fully get this because I don't know if I 100% understood it. So like the author sets up this difference between practice and skill.
Mm.
And practice is about getting better and repeating stuff, basically refining those grooves in reality that practitioners use to do magic.
Mm.
Whereas skill is more, I don't know if I fully got it. My understanding at this point is that skill is like shaping yourself to be better at pushing through those grooves. Like,
Mm.
because the book focuses on, say, others that are natural craftsmen and sort of saying like how you can get that. So it's like it's becoming someone who is the spirits are more likely to let you push along those grooves as opposed to having bigger
Yes.
grooves to push through. Is sort of my understanding.
Yeah, that was kind of my understanding too.
I don't know. It's really like it'll be really interesting to see because it is that somehow linked to obviously we have the Kenneteers and they're wild practitioners. They're going to be different. Everyone's excited to see how they go as students, and here we have this author who was raised by these other people, and when they joined a circle, they were different. And I wonder if that's going to map to what we should expect out of the Kenneteers. Like
Mm.
they're not going to get as much out of the structured practices and learning from the school. Like they're going to have to put their own twist on it to succeed.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, because obviously the second book chosen here is very explicitly tying into some stuff with Verona. And I
Yeah,
guess I hadn't really asked myself the question of what is this first book trying to tell us? But I like that this is the way of it tying back.
yeah. Also, I looked up the like symbol that's used on the thing because they use
Hmm.
the cross of the eighth sun. I was curious to look up what that is. Took a bit of
Hmm.
digging. It's also called the millstones cross, and so like being associated with like millers and millstones. It's like
Right.
associated with like processing grain and stuff. So like I love that that's the symbol they use to treat these objects as you're sort of trying to
Mm.
enchant them. Because
Mm.
like something we're going to skip over as we're talking about this is like we can't just recount all the details. Like but as we sort of touched on in the last episode, like sometimes we weirdly have to skip over bits even if we like them just because it doesn't translate to our podcast format. And like this is one like
Mm.
we can't just sit here and talk about the ins and outs of tempering because that would be boring to
Yes.
listen to.
Yeah.
But it was fascinating to read and like seeing these things like this cross and how it's used in that tempering and sort of learning about how it relates to the hallow stuff Nicolette was talking about. Like enchantment is basically just about slowly sort of imbuing these things with a certain energy.
Yeah, we do kind of walk the line between not wanting to just turn into an audiobook where we're reading the chapters out. But this is a really great, like, I love these magical textbooks. They're always so much fun. So just go reread it. It's worth it, you know?
Yeah. And
The
especially
second.
so
Mm,
little side note. So like how I said it was like the millstones cross, and like obviously that's associated with like again like
yeah,
it's all about grinding like a millstone, right? Like slowly grinding this stuff down, and it's like you're almost
yeah,
doing the opposite with enchanting, right? Like I think they use the word grind in the thing, but
yeah,
it's like grinding in the RPG sense. Like
right.
you sort of slowly putting experience points of a certain kind into these objects to enchant them.
Mm. So the second book that Verona gets is a lot more worrying, I would say. It is a book about though it's called Quasi, a book about the kind of creatures that blur the line between human and other. And she gets this book and she turns straight to the how to DIY section.
What I love about this as well is like so the first bit that we read, and what I'm assuming here is that all the things we read in this extra material is the stuff that Verona was reading. Um,
Yes.
and so basically, this book opens with a summary of the chapters. So it's like in chapter 1 we will explore this, in chapter 2 we will explore this, and
Hmm.
then it gets to chapter 3, and so chapter 3 is we will explore the ways you can turn yourself other. Make sure you are either advanced or have read chapter 1 first. And then the text basically immediately skips to chapter 3, and it's like, oh, for fuck's sake, Verona! Like you just got told you need to read chapter 1. You know you're not advanced. Why are you skipping?
I mean, yeah, like it's clearly signaling to us Verona has this book for one reason and one reason only, right? Um,
Yes, and luckily Lucy's not asking about it yet.
yeah, yet, yeah, we'll see. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, it's rough. Like Verona, come on, you don't need to do this. You're already turning into a practitioner. That's enough. So, yeah, we'll see. Um, so,
Yeah, I
but.
mean,
Mm,
I
um,
was just gonna say, like, I mean, this has been her plan for the whole time. Like, I can't.
True. She does have the
I'm
resources
keen
now to
to
do
follow.
it.
Yeah, as you said, it'll be interesting to see if this place can turn her around on it. But I'm interested enough in it narratively to support it from the you're not actually real perspective.
Mm,
Like, from a dualistic perspective, I'm like, yes, do it.
mm, yeah, we'll see. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not going to harp on it too much because she's it's clearly not just some idle thought that she's had once. Like this is something that she's gotten to the point where she's really starting to seriously look into it and consider it. So we'll see. Having said that, the end of this book is sorry. The end of this book, the end of this in fiction chapter section of the book is basically 100% hinting to us, hey, this is what's going to happen in the future, right? Like
Yeah,
it
I feel
is.
like I've almost unanimously heard everyone respond to the last paragraph of this with, okay, so this is probably what we're doing.
Yeah, this is what we're going to see in somewhere between 2 to maybe 5 chapters. um, yeah, like I'm excited to see it because I think it's going to be Verona going on a journey into her own soul, which is going to be really interesting. And I know that something that's going to happen is she's going to have to fight some kind of representation of her father, and that's going to be incredibly cathartic and fun. So I'm excited for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, we will see.
I think not even because it won't be fighting her dad. It will be fighting her perceptions of her dad,
Mm.
and her relationship with him, which will
Yes, her
be like
internalized
fascinating.
version of her dad.
Yeah, or not even just that way. Like how how she interacts with him more than just like how she perceives him. I'd say like it's gonna be all about like the trying to suppress the emotions stuff. I
Yeah.
would I would guess, but yeah, it's so far like this is obviously like I think everyone's response to reading this was like, oh, we're gonna see that. I think part of it is because everyone's like, what a brilliant narrative device, like hopping into your own psyche, and like literally exploring like yourself.
Yeah.
It's obviously going to be like a very fun thing to read. Um,
Mm.
Especially like it because that's a bit of a trope in like sci-fi things is to like hop into people's minds, and it's always in sci-fi and fantasy. It's like, oh, it's a very abstract place, like endless halls of corridors with
Yeah.
doors that go to like some abstract. And like I particularly hate it in sci-fi because it doesn't make sense sort of scientifically. But this is a world that is built on being an English major, so
Yeah.
like the way spirits work, I'm just absolutely like, well, yeah, of course it's going to be a really abstract, symbolic place inside your
Yeah.
brain, or not inside your brain,
Exactly.
inside your head. Like I can't, I'm so excited for it because this is the world that should be doing it because it totally makes sense to me.
Yes. Yeah. 100%. Um, yeah, I'm excited for that. I think it's going to be
I,
so cool. There's going to be so much in it, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Although we shouldn't like reject. I thought it was super interesting the other ways you could do this. So there were four ways given that you can sort of turn yourself a bit other.
Yes.
There was the visceral one where you just eat some special concoctions and
We call it the Brie
have an
method.
uncomfortable time.
Yep.
Yeah, that was like blotting yourself apart like bit by bit.
Mm-hmm.
Then there was like doing like that's right, it was like doing stuff periodically, like basically, I got like werewolf vibes off
Werewolf
this one, like
vibes.
turn
Yeah,
yourself into a bit
100%.
of a wolf.
On a full moon. Set up a ritual
Yeah,
so that,
yeah, exactly.
you form a pattern around turning into a wolf on the full moon or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And then, after a while just becomes it happens basically on its own.
Yep.
And then there was this last one which is basically going in and doing like soul-based surgery on yourself. Um, I especially what I think is interesting about these is like I feel like these four kind of map to ways to take care of yourself. I've only just sort of thought of this, so it's not the most fleshed out metaphor, so it could be totally wrong. But like it's like if you're trying to get out of a funk or get out of depression, it's like like changing your diet is like that first one. Um,
Mm.
and then like taking better care of yourself, like dressing yourself up a bit, like is sort of how I'd relate to the other one. Like at least when I'm going through a bit of a funk, it's because I'm just sitting around wearing UGG boots and tracksuit pants, and if I dress up a bit, like it makes you feel better.
Yeah.
Um, then like the periodically thing, like building habits and stuff, like just getting out and doing things regularly is
Mm.
very important. And then like I guess soul surgery, maybe that's like therapy or that sort of thing.
Mm.
So like this is a very last minute idea, but sort of mapping these four things into like aspects of self improvement, which is maybe a bit more
Mm.
of a positive spin on them
Yeah, it's like the
than
opposite of
we've
what they
usually had
are.
for. Well, maybe that's why they map because you're kind of going the other way here, or
Yeah.
maybe this isn't so cut and dry, black and white, like bad to turn other like this, depending on how I don't know. It'd be interesting to see if
Yeah,
that
I
goes.
like
Maybe
that.
I'm
It's not even the opposite. That's not the right wording. It's doing the same thing, but for a purpose of improvement. And that's not even saying that becoming another isn't necessarily an improvement. It's just, yeah, I like that. I
Well,
really like that.
maybe like I'm calling it like the four ways to self improve, but like the reason these are the four things that you sort of use to self improve is because like that's the context they're explained in. Like nobody says,
Yeah.
"Hey, if you want to make yourself feel terrible, make sure you have a bad diet." Make sure like nobody's framing it that way, but it's like these are sort of four ways to change your relationship with yourself and with your life. And
Yeah.
and so of course that's the four ways you can start to make yourself more other.
Yeah. Um, and with that, that's the end of our bonus material here. Before we wrap up the episode, though, let's dive into some predictions that were left in our Pale Predictor app, which you can find the link to in the show notes down below.
Yes.
Elliot, do you have a prediction that you really like that you want to pull out?
Yeah, I picked out one from Megafire,
Mm-hmm.
who has predicted that Miss and or Charles were actually co-founders of the Blue Heron Institute, or at least involved in the slaying of this godling that gave Alexander and the others their power.
Mm.
Um, I'm not sure, like, I fully buy this, but, like, it would certainly explain how Miss knew so much about, like, the Blue Heron Institute and what was going on there.
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
I mean, Alexander didn't seem to know who she was, so, maybe it was either, like, pre her getting lost or, like, maybe she was a finder or something, or maybe it's coming from Charles 'cause, Alexander honed in on Charles being there pretty soon. And I think
Or
it
maybe the practitioner that got lost when Miss got out was there or something, you know? Like it's
oh,
not
yeah.
Miss, but yeah. Anyway.
Well, because we talked so much about how, like, the things on the Forest Ribbon Trail were powered by Avery, so if Miss was powered by
Yes.
that practitioner,
By that practitioner,
um
exactly right.
yeah, that's an interesting idea. I think it'd be cool if it was Charles, just from the perspective of, like, if we're still viewing Charles through this bit of a metaphor of, like, he's an ex-con who's getting, like, oppressed by the system for, like, a small mistake he made years before. Seeing how his work was sort of erased from the history books of this prestigious institution, I think would sort of fit into that. Like, they would downplay the involvement of
Yeah.
somebody who became forsworn.
Yeah.
So I think there's yeah, I don't know how specifically I want to get behind Megafire's exact predictions, but I feel like there's actually something here. Like, there's some interesting stuff to play with there.
Thematically, I think there's a lot that would make sense
Yeah.
there. Yeah, definitely. Cool. I also pulled out a theory, which was by a user called Walter, everyone's favorite Muppet. And Walter's theory, you know, if I were you, Elliot, I would staple your socks to your ankles because they're going to be at risk of getting knocked off by this.
I so to give context to the weird shit Ruben's saying right now, uh, this prediction opened with that it was going to hopefully knock our proverbial socks off, and
And it
it was
did.
funny.
My socks were thoroughly knocked off.
I think what's funny is the second I read that sentence, I basically moved on to the next one because I knew that you were going to pull this one out, so I didn't need to worry.
It's so galaxy brain.
As as soon as I
We've
saw a
been
prediction being like, "I'm going to knock your socks off," I was like, "This is a Ruben one."
the thing is, for as the story, like as we kind of the story solidifies and we know where it's going, the galaxy brain predictions have been becoming less and less, and I really hate that. So I'm so glad that Walter brought this one in. So okay. It's the kind of one where you don't even really know where to start. All right, so the Kenneteers awakened and they're kind of awakened as a group, right?
Yep.
And there have been instances that Walter points out of them starting to act more and more in unison. One that Walter points out is the Kenneteers, when they're chasing down Melissa, they were meant to call John, but I think it's Avery who thinks something along the lines of, none of us called it out to John, even though we were meant to, by some unspoken agreement, right? Like Walter kind of points this out as an example of them just kind of acting in unison without even needing to like organize it or think about it. And Walter then extrapolates this out to think that they awakened together and they've started acting kind of as one. Walter thinks that due to the forces on the universe that kind of keep them together and keep them united, that's going to eventually merge them into one entity. So it will start with them beginning to think as one, manifesting as a telepathic ability, communicating telepathically. And finally, the Kenneteers will merge into one single unified entity, and the finale of Pay will be from the perspective of all three Kenneteers at once. Also, Walter says that Bree will eat a brownie, which I don't think is necessarily related to the first major prediction, but just a little one to sneak in there.
I think it's funny. So, like, when I initially came up with the term Kenneteers, it was meant to be a Musketeers thing, but I think everyone's latched onto it as more of a like Planeteers thing.
Planeteers, yeah.
So this is obviously them forming the Captain Planet
Captain Planet,
of
exactly
Kennet,
right. Yeah,
Captain Kennet. Uh,
Captain Kennet.
I mean, what's funny is like, I'm sorry, Walter. I don't necessarily believe that they're going to turn
How
into
dare you?
into Captain Kennet.
Yeah, okay.
I did notice though, after I read this prediction, Walter's right. There were a bunch of references in these two chapters to just how in sync the three
Mm-hmm.
Kenneteers are, and I don't know if those have been there the whole story, but I think I think Walter has maybe latched on to something like there's maybe something we're going to explore with like how in sync these three are, and whether there's magic helping with that or not. Again, I don't think they might go full Captain Kennet, but I think there's something to this one.
Well, I didn't expect you to say that.
Just that note,
But
like
yeah.
they are definitely starting to communicate more, or just like
Hmm.
all make the same decisions and assumptions without needing to check with each other. I think that
Yeah.
actually is something that is happening now that it's been pointed out to me, and it's gonna be interesting to see what that means or why it's happening.
And the ultimate end state of that is, as Walter says, they're going to merge into some kind of chimera with the head of a cat, fox, and deer all together. Anywho, those are some pale predictions from our community. So thank you, Megafire and Walter, for those. Now, it's been a while since we've done one, but we thought it's time that we bring back a discussion question. We want to give
Yes.
people the opportunity to let their minds roam free and come up with all kinds of crazy, kooky shit. And so we've got a discussion question here for you. It revolves around the idea of an Alcazar, which takes a person or an object and turns it into a kind of 3D space. I thought this was such a cool idea that I'd be interested to hear what kind of Alcazar things people could come up with. So here's the discussion question: Alcazar, a person or other? What does it look like? Um,
Yeah,
uh,
I think this is exciting, like, because you could do a real place, like, or sorry,
yep.
a real thing,
Well, a
like,
real thing or person. Yeah.
yeah, like, I don't know, what do the royal jewels in England look like as a place? Or,
Mm,
like, you could do a like, what does Snowdrop look like as an Alcazar, right? Like, that would be fun.
hmm.
So, I mean, go nuts, like, pick whatever person or object, you like and turn them into an Alcazar and let us know what you think it might
What it
look
looks
like.
like. Yeah. You can leave the answers to those to that discussion question in our discussion thread, which will be linked down in the show notes below.
Yes, you can also find us on Twitter at MediaMD Podcast. There's live reads there, notices on all sorts of stuff. Go check it out.
Yep. You could also check out our Twitter, which is, I mean, okay, so it's Pale
Wait,
Reflections,
is
but it's
that's what I
still at
just
media.
that's what I just said.
Oh, sorry, did you?
Yeah.
It's
Oh,
staying in.
sweet
Um,
revenge. No,
so
I
that,
definitely did this in a Deep
you
Impact
did. I
episode
remember you did
once.
it like 4 months ago, and it was the funniest thing that's ever
Sweet
happened.
revenge.
You can go check. You can go check out all of the great content on the Duff Media Network by going to our website, which is duffmedia.com. You can check out all the great shows there. Um, like what? What's a good show there, Elliot? Oh, the
The
Duff
Game Club.
Cast? Is that? Oh, okay. Yeah.
I was good. Well, Game Club comes out about 12 hours after this episode.
Mm-hmm.
That's us covering Slay the Spire. So come check it
That'll
out.
be
And,
fun.
if you're listening to this right when it came out, and you quickly become a patron, you'll have the opportunity to vote on next month's game.
Yes. Next month's game, the vote is still open. I'm very excited to see where it goes because I'm excited to. The choices are great. If you want, you can support the Duff Media Network by going to our Patreon, patreon.com/Duff Media. You can, give us some money to keep doing the shows that we like to do, and you'll also get some perks depending on the level that you reward at, that you
Yes.
back us at. So that's fun.
If you join at the $10 or above Doof Troop tier, you get access to bonus content. So these are shows that are exclusive to those patrons. Matt and his brother do one called Freeman Bros, where they just like explore a variety of intellectual topics.
Topics, yeah.
Um, that's fun. Matthias and Jarvis have just started one called Doofovers,
And
which is basically them defending anime that Matt and Scott didn't like on the
yeah,
Doofcast.
sorry. When I first heard of this, I thought that it was a play on crossover, but it's a play on do-over,
Yeah.
right? That only literally occurred to me today because I was thinking about it and I was like, "Oh, duo! Like they're redoing the episode that they
Yeah.
did." Yeah. Um,
Basically, they're yeah, all the anime that Matt and Scott didn't like, because those two are proud anime fans. They're
I
actually
think I think the term is proud anime nerds.
okay.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So gotcha. And there might be more shows joining that $10 tier in the
Yeah.
near future.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's good. One of the best things about it is you can subscribe and then you get like a podcast feed that you can add to your podcasting
yeah,
device, and it's like a podcast of bonus content every so often. It's great.
yeah.
Um,
So check it out.
yeah. Well, while you're on Patreon, actually, why don't you check out this other cool Patreon that is patreon.com/Wildbow. He's this crazy cat that writes all these cool stories, including Pale. So, yeah, well, it's important that you go there and you leave money for him and you ask him, you leave some money and you express your thanks, but you don't ever acknowledge him in any way. If you do that, he'll kill off your favorite character. So
Yeah.
don't acknowledge him in any way. Just go in, leave the money, and get out.
I think that's your best one yet.
And with that, the show is over.